Okay.
Okay,
Yep, I
I
see it.
resumed.
Okay, so we have 4 attendees on right now. It is exactly 6 o'clock. So we'll give people a couple of minutes to get logged in before we get started so that nobody misses anything.
Sounds good.
So for those of you guys who are in, thank you for coming and for being on time. We will be getting started here shortly. And for those of you who have been with us before, welcome back. I see a lot of familiar names. So we had about 20 or so people register. So we have 5 right now. I know the system sent out reminder emails both yesterday and then about an hour ago. So we've still got a couple of people coming in. So I want to give everybody an opportunity to get in before we get started. And while we're waiting for everybody to get on, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. Our next session, which is part 4 of the HR series, is in a couple of weeks. I believe the date is July 25th. Is that right? Yes, July 25th. That's in the evening at 6 p.m. Central. We are actually also going to add a couple other things. They are not on our calendar yet, but we're getting those together. So we're going to do a security session called Security Best Practices on Monday, June 29th. And then we are also going to have, and I know you guys have asked for this, we're going to have a networking session on Tuesday, June 30th, that evening also. So lots of activities right before the end of the month. And for those of you who may have already applied for your licenses, I sent a note over to DCEO, I think it was yesterday, it was this week, asking if they knew if the licenses were going to come out at the originally scheduled date or not. Because if you guys have been paying attention, and I don't know who has and who hasn't, the dispensary licenses were delayed because of COVID. So I wanted to know if the licenses that were scheduled to come out on July 1st are also going to be delayed because of COVID, or if they're going to keep their actual original schedule, which is that they would all be issued by July 1st. So I'm waiting on an answer on that. As soon as I have one, I will let you know. I also asked information on whether or not, or how would they do the notifications on the licenses, because we have some activities that are lined up specifically for licensees. So you guys can get some time with Desiree, for example, to do one-on-one work on your, for her to review and discuss, your HR policies and whatnot. Also one-on-one time for security. So anybody who is actually getting ready, once you get your license, if you applied previously and your license gets issued on July 1st, for you to actually have a security assessment, and then also an assessment and a business plan with Higher Yields Consulting. All of these things are free to you guys because it's paid for and provided under the grant. So I've asked some questions just in preparation for that to see what the state is going to do, because obviously COVID messed up the schedule, and we know it messed up the schedule for the dispensary licenses. So I'm trying to find out some information. So as soon as I find out some information, because I know there's nothing available publicly, if I find out any insider info, I will pass it along. So I think at this point, I have probably killed enough time. Yes, it is 6:06. So we will go ahead and get started. So for those of you who do not know me, I am Trisha Teague. I do not have hair anymore. I'll go ahead and address the elephant in the room because it's hot. And so I am president of the TREP School. Today's session, oh, thank you, Sinet. Sinet corrected me. Our next session is June 25th, not July 25th. I have July on my mind because I know that's when the licenses are supposed to come out. This session is part 3 of our HR series. This one is all about managing performance. Our presenter is the wonderful Desiree Henderson. And so I will turn over to her. I will say this one thing. If you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. This will be somewhat interactive. So she's going to put things in chat. So if she asks you a question, you can go ahead and respond to chat. But for questions that you guys have, put them in Q&A, because those get recorded and we can like make a log of those and do other cool stuff with it out of the recording that comes out of Zoom. So without further ado, I am going to turn my camera off and turn my mic off and turn over to Desiree.
All right, thank you, Trisha. And the hair looks great, by the way, I love it. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And thank you for those of you who have been in our employment journey as we go through the different stages of the employment life cycle. I am Desiree Henderson. Today's seminar presenting, I always kind of put my disclaimer initially and kind of reiterate that I am not an attorney. I'm just an experienced HR professional. I have been in HR for a little over 20 years now. I love what I do. I enjoy it, even with the crazy circumstances that happen, but that just makes my trainings that much more interesting. So I bring that to share with you based off of my experiences leading HR departments, consulting with many companies over the years, and bringing that with you today. Okay. So we have the employee life cycle. We went through this in our last training for those of you who are with us, and for those who weren't, just going through. When I take a look at employment, there is type of a life cycle. So the last session, we went through the recruitment and selection and onboarding, job descriptions. We reviewed all that. So it's kind of the before we even get employees in the door and getting them in the door. So at this stage of the life cycle, we have our employees that are here with us, and now it's managing them. And this is kind of the meatier part of the cycle, because this is where we will go through and talk about today, performance management and things. And then our next session that we have in a couple weeks, going through disciplining and things like that. But this is kind of the meat of it, because this is what we do when they're here, regardless of if that's 30 days, 90 days, 10 years, right? That's all in part of the employee management. So today we're going through performance and talking through the importance of that and having a plan for that. Effective leaders set measurable performance measures and expectations and guides and coach their employees for peak results. And we want to find ways to also not only give feedback, but creatively recognize our teams and staff for jobs well done. And so we're going to kind of go through and talk about what our experiences have been, and moving forward, the kind of performance management experience you want your employees to have. Okay. One of the things that when we think about it, we all have been probably an employee at one point and have had probably not the best experience with our managers and how they've given us feedback and the do's and the don'ts. So that's something that we do not want to repeat, because we want to think about when we were employed in that place, how did that make us feel? How did it make us feel when our managers didn't fully recognize or acknowledge the contributions to our work environment? How, you know, and how did that make us feel? So we want to make sure that with our employees and when you guys have your teams, that we do not repeat those mistakes and that we do better than what they did. So what we're going to go through our agenda, we're going to talk about what is performance management, the importance of effective performance management, implementing an effective system, and then we have some errors that we want to avoid. So we're going to talk through those because, of course, if we know them up front, we can avoid them. And then we're going to talk about actually conducting the performance meetings, the do's and the don'ts. Of course, every step of the way, we have the things that we want to be compliant with, and then also Q&A. And that's something that you can ask throughout our presentation. All right, so what is performance management? So one of the things that we did in our last session is I was able to do some feedback, which I really enjoyed, and I hope you guys did as well, to have it more interactive. So we're going to start off with the first question. Describe what you think performance management entails. And you can just put your answers into the chat and we can go through them. So what do you think it entails? What should it include? Whether it's based off your experience or lack of not having it, what you felt like it should have had. So let's get some of those going.
So I know people are probably typing. So while we wait for people to type, because I was gonna type and then I said, oh, I'll just say it out loud because I can turn my mic on. I would say it probably entails the process of like making sure people are doing their jobs. Okay, I basically killed enough time for somebody to finish typing. Okay.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
All right, so Johnny said planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. Karen said an assessment of compliance with the work processes.
Good. Excellent. So as we have some more responses, I'm sure coming through, you know, when we think about performance management, we're thinking really, you know, I love it when I also am an adjunct professor, and I love when my students say, oh, I can't wait to go into HR and be an HR manager, a director of a department, or be a company manager. And, you know, when you think about, for those of us who have managed, you know, managing is less actually doing work function stuff for the business. It's more really overseeing employees. So about 80% of our jobs as a manager should be spent on employee performance and feedback and seeing what they're doing. So it's always funny to me. Some people say it's babysitting. I wouldn't say that, but it's just properly, you know, giving that feedback, because when we're doing that, then our teams know the do's and don'ts of what's expected, and then it's a better work environment as well. Any more in the chat?
No,
Okay.
those were the only two answers.
Okay, no problem. And that's great answers, great input. So exactly. So those are going to be a lot of what your performance management should entail. And, you know, when we look at that, that's truly performance management. When we're focusing most of our time on giving that feedback, documenting performance and redirection to our employees as to what they should or should not be doing. You know, it's less time on task-oriented stuff and job and more on that. And not always, you know, realistic or attainable, but you want to make sure that it's a good goal that we shoot for. Again, some days are going to be better than others, right? But spending valuable time on employees will improve employee morale, increase client satisfaction, and produce greater business results. And performance management is ongoing. Some people will say, well, how often should I review my team and give them feedback? You know, should we do annually, quarterly? And, you know, that might be good for maybe formalized, but my answer to that is all the time. You know, there's never, you know, a time I'll say, no, it's, you know, wait to give feedback, give it ongoing. When it's done correctly, a performance appraisal allows you to highlight successes of the employee during the review period and identify areas in which the employee needs to improve performance in the upcoming year. And I'll tell you that employees crave that. They want that feedback. I know that there's a couple companies I've worked for where they were trying to be progressive and not necessarily have a regular system of feedback or in the process of that. And, you know, they say, well, how am I supposed to know what I'm supposed to be doing? And you would think that employees would instinctively say, oh, good, no one can tell me what I'm doing or not doing. But actually, it's the opposite. They want to know, they want that feedback. Here we go. So the stages of performance management, we have our coaching and counseling, evaluation, recognition, and development planning. And so these are some of the things that you'll see intertwined today in our presentation. You know, at the end of the presentation, you'll be able to describe the components of effective performance appraisals, list the steps involved in the review process, identify potential litigation concerns, that's kind of always in the back of our mind, and avoid common errors that sometimes can be made. So, and then we'll also discuss how you can proactively manage employee performance prior to actually giving the performance appraisals. All right, so we're going to get a little bit more into some situations that may come up to kind of prep us for what we're going to be discussing today. And again, in the chat, you can give your answer. So what do you think? So question number one, your employee has not been meeting performance goals and or has been producing substandard work in some key areas of responsibility. You have told the employee that these are critical responsibilities and if deadlines cannot be met or if additional assistance is required to let you know. You followed up your conversation with the memo. The employee misses another deadline and did not let you know that the work would be late. What should you do? Take those responsibilities away from the employee. B, terminate employment. C, demote the employee. Or D, counsel the employee on their performance and give a written warning. Which do you guys think it is? A, B, C, or D?
So I see, okay, Johnny and Ivera say D, Shaka says C, James says A, Corey says D, Karen says D.
Okay, so it seems like D is the common answer. So let's talk through some of them and we'll see what might be the most fitting. So A, if we take away the responsibilities away from the employee. Now, we learned in our last session the importance of having the job description and hiring to that. So in this situation, we've done everything right. We had our job description. We posted an accurate description of it online. We took our time interviewing, and we've selected this employee. And we've given feedback to the employee of what they need to be doing, and the deadlines aren't met, the work is not there, but we're giving that feedback, but that's what we've hired them to do, correct? So if we take these responsibilities away from the employee, then that's not fair, right? What happens to those duties that needs to be done? We give it to another employee, okay, so then they have extra work. You know, if we take it on as a manager, which I have seen some managers do and it does not work well, but either way, we have given these employees these duties for a reason, and those duties are part of the job that we are paying them to do. So if they can't do them, then that's a problem, and we have to look at continuing if they're going to be the best fit for that position. If we take the responsibilities away, then it's enabling them to do what we hired them to do, and that's not a good pattern that we want to practice. So I don't believe anyone said B, so that's good. We don't really have any documentation to just jump to B, although sometimes we'd like to and just start over again with the employee. So we want to, so that wouldn't be demoting the employee. So when we demote someone, we are also taking away from their income. And, you know, in many states, when we are taking away from their income without any documentation, that's problematic. And that could potentially leave us open for all types of things without the documentation, right? So we want to make sure that we don't jump to that. Now, let's say it may come to that. That's a type of disciplinary action, but again, we need our documentation, which leads us to D, counsel the employee on the performance and give them a written warning. That written warning is our documentation that we may need to start progressive discipline and to potentially do some of the other answers that are listed there. Okay, great, thank you for that. So next, question 2. It is acceptable to apply different rules to your top performer than your worst performer. True or false? What do we think?
I think
True or false?
I think people are pondering. Okay, a couple of falses, another false, false. So far I've only seen false.
Excellent. So it seems like we have the theme of false. If you chose false, that is correct. As much as we would like to reward our top performers by giving them, a little extra leeway in the workplace, when we have those people that know, hey, so-and-so gets it done, I don't need to be on their back about stuff, great. But we want to think about, we want to set consistency. And sometimes our worst performers and even the middle of the road performers, they don't always look at it that way. When we treat people differently, a lot of times employees don't look at it like, well, so-and-so is the top salesperson, or so-and-so, is the most productive around here, so I guess they deserve to get a little bit extra. They don't look at that. Employees look at it as, well, that's not fair. Why do they get that? Is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm this minority or over 40 or this, that, and the other? Then we have issues of favoritism and possibly discrimination. So we want to be consistent. So a lot of times I'll tell my clients, I say, when you apply a rule, apply it and put it in place if it was your worst performer or top performer doing it. If this is how you would treat your top performer, then you have to, it's the same thing across the board. So, and that helps it helps the workplace stay consistent, and that helps alleviate other potential issues that can pop up. Question 3, you think one of your employees is spending too much time on personal phone calls. What should you do? Right? This never happens, I'm sure. Personal phone calls, texting, on social media while at work, all that fun stuff. So we have, what should you do? We have A, listen in on their conversations to verify if they are personal in nature. B, focus on work performance and counsel in areas that need improvement. Or C, explain that personal calls are not allowed and that any time spent on personal calls during the workday will be docked. Do we think it's A, B, or C?
Okay, we have so far 2 people said C.
Okay.
We have another C. So 3 C's. Another C. Karen says B.
All right. Well, we have another one.
And okay, Corey said B.
Okay, we have a tough group here. Okay, so let's go through them. So A, we didn't have anyone say A, so that's good. So A would be incorrect. Listen in on their conversations to verify their personal in nature. We don't want to do that. Some states are kind of strict with their privacy laws, so we don't want to listen in. And also, if they are personal in nature and you're listening in, you never know what you might hear. So we want to be careful with that, and we may hear something we don't want to hear. So we don't need to do that. A lot of times we can tell if something's personal, so we wouldn't do that. So we have B, focus on work performance and counsel in areas that need improvement, or C, explain that personal calls are not allowed. So the first part of C starts off really well. Where we get into issues with C is that docking part of the workday, right? We want to be careful because it could lead to wage and hour claims because we don't know what part of the workday they're actually, what percentage they're on the calls, and how do we dock this part versus another. But we can focus on what they didn't get done and where they need to improve. Okay, so we don't want to get into any wage and hour issues. So we can kind of do a hybrid of C, explain that personal calls are not allowed, and then focus on the work performance and counsel areas that need performing. Because a lot of times when our employees are playing around the computer and do other things, it's going to eventually show up in their work. So we'll address it from that standpoint. And also it's easier to document that and prove. So if it comes to a point where something needs to be defended. Okay. Question 4. You're meeting with an employee who is negative, disrespectful to coworkers, frequently late, and not producing at a high level. When you meet with this person, the best way to handle the situation is just to tell them they have a bad attitude and you expect improvement. True or false? I'm sure at some point in our career, whether we're the manager or the coworkers, we've had we've had this employee, right? And we all wonder, why don't they just quit? But they never quit. They stay there and they just make it that much more exciting. Okay, so we have true or false. What do we have?
We have 3 falses and 1 true.
Okay, okay. Right? So in a perfect world, we would like to tell them you have a bad attitude and you need to get it together, right? That would be the best way. However, we want to take a look at, we get feedback on what's measurable. And although we may be able to prove in a sense by just their thing saying, yeah, that's a bad attitude, but how do we measure a bad attitude? That's the problem. So you can document behavior, but you can't document opinion. And sometimes someone's attitude is kind of opinion based, right? So in regard to kind of disrespecting the coworkers, there's actions that are behind that we can take it a step further and actually have things as observable behavior that can be documented. So, and in regard to the frequently late, that's a performance violation. So that's easy to, kind of do that. That's a violation of that attendance policy and coming in late. So those are things that we can document and speak to versus attitude. Because I tell you, I've had managers in the past that have said, well, I told them they have a bad attitude. And then the next thing out of that person's mouth is, well, so-and-so doesn't think so. I get along with that manager, it's just you, and I get along with that department. And then it becomes a debate of the back and forth, and we don't want to get into that. So we want to deal with the facts. So they may have a bad attitude, but we're going to take it a step further. I noticed that you've been negative here lately. For example, when we rolled out the new product line of this, that, and the other, the first thing you said is it'll never sell. And, so we want to back up things with actual facts so that it doesn't sound like someone's opinion. And then that takes it away from being personal. We'll find that a lot of times when we give our employees feedback, they don't always want it and they take it personally and they get to, oh, you don't like me and different things of that sort. But when you have the facts behind it, it's taking it and saying, well, even though you think I may not like you, it still doesn't take away that you're 20 minutes late every day. So we kind of, so it's easy to support the discussion with them. Okay, and lastly, question 5. Employers are required to complete formal performance reviews on employees at least once each year. True or false? True or false? Do we have to give performance reviews to our employees? And if we do, does it have to be at least once a year?
Okay, so we've got 1 true, 1 false, another true, so 2 trues and 1 false, another false, so 2 and 2. True. Okay. So 3 trues and 2 falses.
Okay, so the trues are winning so far. Anybody else? Okay, so although performance reviews are best practice, when we kind of talked about, when we started off this series, there's a lot of things in HR that we've seen at companies that we would assume from company to company that this is just the way. We should get holidays, we should get vacation, we should have performance reviews. So even though it's a thing that's something that should be done, this is false. Employers are not legally required to give performance reviews. So this isn't anything that you have to do. However, if you want thorough and accurate performance reviews and have documentation and be able to boost morale and help employees achieve goals, then you're going to want to have a formal system in place. All right, thank you for that. So we go to the next step. Why is performance management important? Effective performance appraisals can be comprehensive and honest. Performance appraisals can provide an objective and consistent basis for employment decisions and help defend themselves against legal claims of negligent retention, discrimination, and wrongful discharge. Also, the benefits are having strengthened relationships with employees to improve. So a lot of times, managers will kind of give feedback and say, oh, I don't like having to do them. They're time consuming. We dislike having to write them. It's hard to remember what happened throughout the year. So it's so important to get your managers buy-ins and by reviewing these benefits with them. And I've had to do many performance reviews in my day, and some as long as 11, 12 pages full of figuring out, putting in the competencies and goal settings and all of that. And they can be time consuming, but I'll tell you what, if you have to ever come back to it and address performance issues, it is gold when you have to do that. So if it's done right, it'll actually save you time and headaches, so to speak, on the back end with your employees, then just go ahead and putting it in place in the first place. And that's not to say that all review systems have to be long-winded and time-consuming. There's some that can be short and sweet and to the point, and we'll kind of go through that near the end of our presentation this evening. And there's some that can be more comprehensive. You want to do what's best for your environment and what's going to be best for your culture, and also what's going to match with the vision that you have for your workplace. Performance appraisal objectives. As a supervisor, your career success depends on your ability to effectively lead your team to achieve or exceed the performance expectations set by you and your company. Individuals reporting to you and to your supervisors want the opportunity to be successful. A performance appraisal is a formal method to help facilitate that process. So we want to make sure that when we have the performance objectives, the things are to assess employee potential. It's going to clarify job responsibilities and performance expectations. It's going to identify strengths and weaknesses. And it should also, I want to add, it should also be something that's a two-way conversation. It's not something that you want to sit down and just read the information from your from that employee and that's it. You want it should be a discussion where you're going through and reviewing things with them, getting their buy-in. It's going to set goals for improvement and provide regular feedback. It's going to reinforce good behavior and correct problem behavior, motivate employees to perform at a higher level, document work performance, and support disciplinary actions. So one of the things that we use this for at my organization today is if we have someone, if a manager reaches out to me and says, oh, I need to term this employee, they're not performing, the first things I'm going to do is look and see, okay, have there been any write-ups and any discussions, and what review did they give? And I'll tell you the situations where they have no review or they overgave them a review just to kind of make things easy and get to put them at exceeds expectations. It's like, well, how were they exceeding expectations 3 months ago, but now you want to fire them? That doesn't pan out. It's confusing to me as an HR professional, but it's going to be confusing to the employee as well. So we want to keep those things in mind. Some of the other objectives, they're going to assist in organizational objectives. They're going to help you with your HR planning, with recruiting, compensation planning and employment decisions and training. There's times when we've done performance reviews that say a group of a similar department and we have the same issues that are occurring and we think, you know what, maybe this could be a training issue, or this may help us recruit better if we're missing certain components from current employees that we have. So there's a lot of different ways that when done correctly, that performance appraisals can be helpful. Okay, so now we've talked about why it's important to have a review system, but there's so many different ones out there. How do we choose one? What do we do with implementing them? So let's talk a little bit about that. So regardless of the type of format of the selected method to review an employee's behavior and work expectations, clear definitions of each level of performance must be provided. Raters should be provided with examples of behaviors, skills, measurements, and other performance factors to assist them in evaluating an employee. Several types of performance review systems are common in use. Each system has its benefits and drawbacks. So some of the systems we want to go through this evening, we'll talk about some of the top ones. So one of the top ones are ranking systems. Ranking systems list all employees in the designated group from highest to lowest in order of performance. The primary drawback with this, though, is that it's quantifying the difference in the individual could be difficult. Another issue is that when you're ranking your team and you say, okay, we're going to see who's the best and who's the worst in this, it forces you to have ranking. So if you have everyone that's kind of on the same level, you can initially have someone that's doing a great, a decent job, that's meeting, and possibly even exceeding. But because you have to rank them and they maybe not be as good as others in the group, it's going to put them on the bottom, and that can be demotivating, which is the opposite effect that we want to have with our review system. So maybe if you have a sales organization and it's real easy to see the numbers and there's a clear ranking with that, the ranking method might be better for that, but it may not work in every environment. Another example that's similar to ranking is forced distribution. Forced distribution is when the ratings of employees in a particular group are dispersed along a bell curve, with the supervisor allocating a certain percentage of the ratings within the group to each performance level on the scale. The actual distribution of employee performance may not resemble a bell curve, so supervisors may be forced to include some employees at the other end of the scale when they would not otherwise place them somewhere in the middle. So again, this is very similar to ranking. So a lot of times when we're using the bell curve, we have, and I've had to use this before, when we have a certain amount of money that we have for our increases. And we have, let's say, $10,000 for the department, and we have, let's say, 7 employees that we have to spread that across. Well, unfortunately, we can't give everybody the equal amount, so we have to spread it. We want to make sure that we do that where we're continuing to motivate our employees and not demotivate, but we also want to reward good work for what's given. It's difficult when you have a department where everyone may either be average or high performing and even low performers, and you don't have a clear high, mid, low, which is what the bell curve and the forced distribution makes you do. So that's something that's a problem with forced distribution method. Another method is the 360-degree feedback. This process collects information from the employee supervisor, colleagues, and subordinates about an individual's work-related behavior and its impact. I've even seen the 360 even used with clients as well, where they include them in giving feedback. And it's anonymous, so you don't know necessarily who said what, but it's everyone that employee touches has a part of that feedback. So some other names for it may be called multi-rater feedback or multi-source feedback, but they're all different types that we call 360 because it's a complete view of everyone that works with that employee. Sometimes this can be really good. I've seen this used mostly for management level employees, which is better to see what their full effect is and the impact with their employees as well as the other management within the organization. Where I've seen 360 potentially go wrong is when, sometimes the comments, and because it is, of course, going to be confidential who says what, sometimes when things are negative, it creates kind of a bad taste in someone's mouth. And when they don't know who said what, then they take it out on everybody. so there's going to be particular groups of employees that you would use this versus others. Maybe teachers, this would be something that's good with and using because this is important that they see from how productive they are with communicating with other teacher staff, parents, and students. So that would be a situation where 360 feedback may be helpful. Okay, some other systems are competency-based. A competency-based system, this is a system that focuses on performance as measured against specific competencies. So when we talk about competencies, we're talking about kind of the behaviors versus task-oriented. Getting sales, making the certain amount of widgets, having good quality widgets, those are more, those are going to be more task-oriented or task-oriented. When we talk about competency, we're talking about, let's say, teamwork is a type of competency or team building. How does someone do that? A strategic approach, that's going to be a type of competency. So a competency is going to be more behavior-based. How do they attribute to those? So competencies are good for, again, more exempt and managerial or professional level employees. If you have hourly employees that are more task oriented, competencies are going to be really hard to attribute to that. So that's when competencies based would be appropriate or not appropriate. Management by objectives are also called MBOs. That's a process which goals are set collaboratively for the organization, various departments, and each individual member. Employees are evaluated annually based on how well they have achieved the results specified by the goals. MBOs are particularly applicable in non-routine jobs, such as those of managers, project leaders, and individual contributors. So where I've seen MBOs best used is when you have a company MBO, where it's a company or department initiative, and then you may have an individual MBO. And MBOs are something that you can track and you're going to measure throughout the review period. So again, it's going to be very difficult for employees that are more task-oriented, manual labor. It's going to be hard to constantly be tracking that, because that's going to be part of their daily routine versus big picture things that are going to be, let's say, quarterly goals, even monthly goals, and annual goals. So that's going to be more a time when you use MBOs versus when you would not. Then you have graphic rating scales. A graphic rating scales, or GRS, appraisals list several factors, including general behaviors, characteristics. It's going to be kind of a compilation of a few different types of things. The rating is usually based on a scale of 3 to 5 gradations. Marginal, unsatisfactory, satisfactory, high, outstanding. That's when you're going to see kind of like your rating from like 1 to 5, 1 being, needs improvement, and the top being, let's say, outstanding or exceptional. This type of system allows the rater to determine the performance of an employee along a continuum because of its simplicity. GRS tends to be one of the most frequently used forms of performance appraisal. And it's frequently used because it's easy to use across a multitude and types of employees. You can use this for your non-exempt and entry level, as well as your experienced and professional level. You can have it as simple as, attendance 1 to 5, teamwork 1 to 5, and it's easy to see where the employee falls. It's easy to, if you have a scale of your performance matrix in regards to salary increases, and say, okay, if someone scores a 50, this is their increase. The increase is this amount, and it's done. So, and that's a lot of times it's really easy to defend because it's, it's easy to, comprehend and make sense of. So that's the most common forms that you'll see of review systems. Okay. Anyone have any questions? As we said, you can save questions to the end, and feel free to ask questions throughout as well. So when we're taking a look and choosing what type of system that we want to have some key elements as a part of it. We want to make sure that they mirror our corporate culture. The company's performance appraisal system should reflect the company's core values, mission statement, and support the corporate culture. If we have a culture of high performance and getting things done and completion and things like that, then we're going to have a review that's going to mimic that. It's going to, in a sense, kind of grade or judge employees based off of how much they perform that can be tracked and calculated. If you have a system that's more on ongoing development, then maybe it's going to be more competency-based and more on, performance of setting like development goals and things like that with your employees. So you really want to make sure it's tied in to that. You want to make sure it has management support. If you don't have your management support, you can have the best laid plans and the best review, but at the end of the day, they're going to be doing that on your behalf. As we all know, a manager can sink the ship or keep it afloat, right? Because they're the ones that are running the business when we're not there. It's a good idea to have 2 levels of management also sign off on the performance appraisal and review it. I always suggest having reviews approved and either by the owner or HR, or reviewed and input by another manager before giving it to the employee. Sometimes there's things that someone else may catch that sometimes we have missed or need to put in or may not be worded right. And this helps review that things, this helps ensure that the review is written factually and fairly. It makes the employee aware that the next level of management understands their level of performance. So that's something that we want to think about. And it also keeps things consistent from department to department if there's multiple departments. We want to make sure that clear performance standards are applied. We want to make sure that employees know in advance what that is. I've had companies ask me in advance, oh, should the employees see what we're going to be, judging them on or rating them on? Should they get the reviews ahead of time? Absolutely. If I don't know the map, how do I know where I'm supposed to go, right? So let the employee see what they're going to be reviewed on. I would even venture to say early in their employment, introduce them to the review system, let them see it. That way there's no surprises come the review time. I can't tell you how many times, I've heard employees say, well, I think I'm doing a good job. My manager hasn't said anything. I guess I'll find out on my performance review, which is the wrong time to find out about it. So we want to make sure that we have clear, measurable standards ahead of time that are communicated, and that employees know where they're going to stand and where they may fall. Rewards. Whenever possible, link merit increases to performance appraisal results. And I'll tell you, especially recently in the past couple of years, this has been debatable amongst managers and even HR professionals in regards to that. More and more companies are taking away the merit increases and tying it to the reviews. There are situations where that works, and there are situations where that does not work. I've seen both. I'll tell you that it's still new and people are still getting used to that because it's embedded in our head. Well, I get a performance review, I do a good job, I receive a reward and a merit increase. I get money for that. So when that's taken away, it's kind of hard for employees to link that to, wow, I did a great job, now what, right? Other than I get to keep my job. So I say that whenever possible, it's good to tie it into something positive. That way, again, it's that positive reinforcement. And then on the other side of it, if they're not performing, then it's that negative reinforcement where they don't get that much of a bonus or any bonus at all, or they don't get an increase. One of the hardest things, unfortunately, due to the COVID times is even for companies that have been able to afford to stay in business, they may not be able to afford to give their employees that increase. So how to continue motivating employees outside of that. So those are some of the things that it's going to be a little tricky, but there's ways to do it. I mean, a lot of employees are happy to still maintain employment and be employed, but tying it to something else outside of funds can be helpful. Maybe you have a group something, maybe it's lunches or some other way of appreciation that they can get outside of just financial rewards, especially if a company cannot afford to do that. It could also be a lump sum. Financial rewards doesn't have to be an ongoing increase. It could be lump sum increases as well. That always helps. Okay, some other key elements. Objectivity performance criteria must be based on the job, not the person currently performing the work. So I know sometimes it can be difficult when we're looking at putting something together of, whether it be the job description or how we should rate a job. We often look at who's doing it now, whether we are happy with what they are in that role, what they're doing, or not happy. So we want to make sure, ideally, based off the job description and what that role's goal is for the company, what should we be looking at? So if we take a look at that, then we can put the reviews and the rating systems around that. So we want to make sure that we use an update job description. That's one of the best ways to connect it to performance, and make sure our supervisors and managers that they're conscientious about evaluating employees fairly and objectively based on predetermined performance standards. Also make sure that the company policy is in line with it, and policies and procedures also to be consistent. If we have a policy that says once a year in January, beginning of the year, everyone gets a review, we want to make sure we hold to that. If we say employees get a review at their anniversary date, we want to make sure we stand by that. If it's sporadic and all over the place, and whenever we get time to do it, that's going to cause some issues. Other key elements are going to be training. So once you determine what you want to rate the employee on, the categories, how often you're going to do that, we give it to our supervisors, and I tell you, we will be remiss and set ourselves up for failure if we do not train them on how to do that. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that where, I hear companies say, oh yeah, our supervisors, they do all the feedback, they do, the performance reviews, the write-up and everything, and they don't train them. And then we read the comments and we go through, and there's inconsistencies and things that shouldn't be said on them, so we want to make sure that we have it. We want to keep it going to be successful. Just having the physical review, it doesn't end there. Now we have to train our supervisors and managers on how to get them, how to utilize them. Train them on the mechanics of the performance appraisal system, why it's important to use, why it's important to fill them out accurately, talk about company policies and procedures, and also talk about the common rater errors and how to avoid them. And we'll also go through that today as well. So we want to take it through from start to finish. And then we want to do quality control. Completed appraisals should be reviewed by a designated member of upper management or HR. And that's where I say it's good to give multiple feedback before we give it to the employee. I can't tell you how many times I've seen where they, give the review, they give it to the employee, get their feedback, and then it goes up for review. Well, at that point, it's too late. It's hard to go back and undo any negativity or bad things that have been done versus just taking a little bit extra time up front to make sure things are done before we give it to that employee. All right, some other key elements of a successful performance appraisal system: daily feedback or ongoing feedback. Managers and supervisors should provide daily performance feedback to employees, no matter how frequently formal performance evaluations are conducted. There's no substitute for ongoing communication between supervisors and employees. This communication is key. So I would say, I know daily feedback, that seems like a lot, right? Because then that's all we'd be doing most of the time. But have regular feedback. Some of the ways I've done this with my team is I've done regular one-on-one meetings, whether it be weekly or bi-weekly. And that was good for us just to even talk about the projects that they're working on, where they're at with those projects. Because if we're having those weekly meetings, talking through a project, and we're talking about this team member's deliverables and when they should be getting or completing certain things, and they're not doing it, now I have constant communication with them. And now I can say, hey, 3 weeks ago, we were talking about this. Why are we still on this step? Where are we? When are we going to get to the next step? And that's already time to communicate to the employee that you're falling behind, you're falling below expectations. So that's one way to do that. And then to document those meetings, even it could be as informally as on the pad of paper and tablet writing it. Or what I used to do was I used to type them up and then have an employee folder for each of my employees, and I put them in there. And then that way I could go back and review them, because if I felt that I was having to repeat myself multiple times, I'd go back and say, I know I told them that. When did I say that? And I can go back and draw from that. That's also helpful if I need to do a written warning. I can reference that. For performance reviews, I can reference that. And we can also use it for the positive things as well. One of the things is that we'll talk about in the rating errors is that, we're humans, right? There's so much that goes, along from day to day that we forget. We forget we have a year to go through. We're going to forget what they did 6 months ago. So it's good to remember, because what we don't want to do is only think in the last month or few months that we could remember, and only base them on that when we're really talking about the whole review period. Is there a question, Tricia?
Yes, there is. So the question is, will you do daily feedback as a group?
It depends on what it is. It's better to do it one-on-one, because we want to deal with the employees, their performance individually. But if it's a group or team that's responsible for something, then it doesn't hurt to do that. And then as a team, they can talk amongst themselves and figure out maybe who's falling short. But if we've assigned something to a group that we want them to do, and the group's falling short, and they're going to all essentially kind of get the same grade or rating on that, then you can. But typically feedback is done individually on a one-on-one basis to give, confidentiality, privacy. And of course, we don't want to embarrass anybody or anything like that. Great question. So another part of giving ongoing feedback is having periodic review and updates. Every company's performance appraisal system should be reviewed and evaluated periodically. So we want to make sure from year to year, the system that we're using, is this still appropriate? Does this still meet our goals? Sometimes we get in a rut and we use something because that's what we've always used, right? So we want to make sure that it's effective. If someone's not, I've seen reviews where we've continued using them and different systems and things are discussed in there that the company didn't even use anymore. So we want to make sure that we don't just have them to have them, that they really represent the current state of what the job position should be doing. Communicating performance standards. We want to make sure that we're communicating and clarifying the desired behavior, what we are looking for from this employee. We want to make sure that we use these standards to be fair and make sure that they're valid and that they make sense, that they're appropriate. met with, you know, some managers that they kind of have unrealistic expectations. I remember an owner one time, he was, you know, concerned about the level of commitment his employees had, because he said, well, you know, they just here 8 to 5 and they just do what they're supposed to do and leave, and, you know, nothing more, nothing less. And I'm here at opening and closing. I don't leave until all my work is done and things. And I said, well, it sounds like they're meeting expectations. What more do you want them to do? And if so, you know, how are you communicating that? You know, what are they missing? Are they doing their job? You know, what's the incentive for them to go above and beyond? You know, as a business owner, we're going to easily be more connected because this is our baby, our passion, and trying to let go of that and realizing that for our employees, this is a job. You know, this is not their passion a lot of the time. So sometimes we have to remember that, but we want to make sure that the expectations that we're setting for them, that it's fair and that it's attainable. We definitely don't want to expect them to have the same passion about our work as we do. So that's why we have that in there. Rules and standards should be in writing. Of work rules are generally in the form of a policy statement or included in employee handbook. Job standards should be communicated in conjunction with job descriptions. Again, the job description, as we talked about in our last training, that's something that's not mandatory. We're not, you know, legally required to have them, but as you can see in every step of employment, how it's helpful. Supervisors play an important role in communicating and enforcing work rules and job standards. Supervisory employees have a higher level of responsibility. The law looks at them as agents of the business because they're your enforcers. They're there to make sure people are coming in on time, that they're following processes and procedures. So it's so important that they're clear and understanding of the policies and trained, and that they know how to apply that within the work environment. Okay, so now we're looking at establishing our system. So we've gone through, we've reviewed the different types of systems, we've looked at the employees we've had to try to decide what would be the best fit for them, for our team, what's going to work on our workforce. And also there's no problem having different systems. You have different types of employees sometimes, even from non-exempt and hourly employees to managers. So it's very common that you may have a different set of expectations and review system for your managers than you do your other employees. Or different work groups may have it, depending on your sales may have a different set of expectations and review compared to your line level employees to your management. So it's very possible that you can have multiple in the same workforce. When used as a basis for employment decisions, standards must be relevant, free from contamination. So for example, if employees are doing the same job but under different conditions, the standards should not be the same. We want to make sure that it's reliable. We want to make sure that things are consistent and that it's able to maintain from individual to individual. We don't want to, again, have the situation where, oh no, well, for our good employees, we're going to rate them this way, but for other employees, we're going to use this system. We want it to be something that can be used across the board for that group. We want to review the characteristics of effective performance standards and goal setting. So before an appraisal can be conducted, the aspects of the job need to be evaluated and determined. So again, that's drawn straight from the job description. Each major job responsibility needs to be evaluated in terms of standards of performance. This is where, you know, other documentation that you may have. So we've talked about the importance of, you know, the job descriptions, but this is some areas that can also be drawn from the handbook as well. So your employment handbook can have policies and things that can help provide some of the areas and standards that you want to create. You want to make sure that things are precise and not subject to interpretation, because again, we're human, right? So how I perceive something may be different from someone else. And if I'm using that to rate my employees on and another manager's using theirs, then we're going to have inaccurate systems and problems in the workforce. So we want to make sure they're clear to the point where manager A using the form can read and understand it the same way manager B would probably be able to use it. So for performance standards to be effective, they should be documented, precise, measurable, realistic, designed to support company objectives, mutually agreed on, and reevaluated on a regular basis. Another thing that we want to make sure is that we have SMART goals. So we take a look at SMART. SMART is specific, measurable, attainable, Is it relevant and time bound? This is one of the best ways to kind of do a check against your systems to see if they're going to work for your environment. So if they don't answer these questions, then there's going to be issues with them being to be adhered to and to be able to be given that feedback. Goals that are SMART clearly define desired performance and how you will know when they're achieved. Okay. It also helps with preparation. You know, as a reviewer, your preparation is the most important factor to contributing to the success of the performance appraisal meeting. So this is part of that. When we do this on the upfront and we make sure that our review and how we're rating our employees falls into this matrix, it makes it that much smoother and easier. Okay. So the next section, we're going to get into actually giving the review. Do we have any other any questions or anything before we get into that section? Okay. All right, good. So we have giving the review. So as we prepared to give our review, we have some things that we want to keep in mind. So at this point, we've done our due diligence and making sure we have the right system. We've gone through the different performance management systems to see what's going to be the best fit for us. We've chosen the areas, whether it be competency-based or job-based or 360 or what have you, that we're going to review on. And now we're actually preparing to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? We've changed our managers, and now we have to, our final preparations for this. So, and we want to also remember that this should be done on an ongoing basis. Documentation should reflect the entire review period and not just the last few weeks as well. We want to make sure that we are compiling information for the whole review, whether it be quarterly, semi-annually, or annually. So we're gathering our review documentation. Documentation may include job descriptions, job specifications, notices of employees' deficiencies, goals, conversations that you've had, maybe review emails. This is one of the areas where I say the ongoing documented reviews help in those one-on-one meetings, because it gives you a track of throughout the year, week to week or bi-weekly, at least formally, where you've had communications to see where your employees are in certain areas. And then we can go back and review that documentation and be ready for the review. I also, as employee coaching, I also suggest for employees that they also keep track of what they've done throughout the year as well. Because a lot of times if they come back and say, well, that's not fair, I've contributed more, I've done this, and we say, okay, well, what projects did you work on? And, you know, it's better for them to document what they did on those projects, because again, as managers, we forget, right? It's best if we document it as well. That way we don't forget, but it takes two to help with employee performance. It's both sides. Prepare the employee by providing them a blank copy of the performance review in advance. This may be used to assist in self-reviews or to provide the employees with an agenda for the performance review meeting. So again, my suggestion would be to provide it at a couple different times upon their employment. When they first come in, it's good to review it with them when you're having a review of that job description again. If there's any changes before you have the review, update all employees with what the changes are. And it doesn't hurt. I mean, it's nothing to hide. You can even have it in the a company portal where they always have access to it. And then it's also good maybe about 5-10 days in advance before you actually have your meeting with them, make it available to them again. So again, they can be reminded as to what you've been monitoring them on throughout the year. Okay. Choose a convenient time and place to meet. Select a location that's going to be private and take steps to ensure there will not be any interruptions. You know, unfortunately, there's times where we have limited space, and so I've seen companies use the lunchroom and different things to do that. You know, it's good if you use a corner office or something like that. Again, you don't want it interrupted. You want it to be confidential. So regardless of spacing, you want to keep that in mind. Best practices are to set the meeting at least 10 days in advance. We don't want to spring it up on anyone. Sometimes employees get nervous with that, you know, and they're like, oh, wow, why am I all of a sudden getting my review? Again, that helps also too, when you have a regular review time, then it's expected. But it's good to kind of give them, you know, 10 days in advance, because we're human. We do have anxieties when it comes to that, and we don't want them being nervous by something thrown at them at the last minute. Making sure, again, there's a private office or conference room to do it in. Schedule at least an hour, because we want to make sure that we're not, again, just sitting and reading it to them. We want that feedback, and it's hard to do that with a limited time. You don't want to rush through it. Make sure it's kind of on neutral territory, and be ready to have your notes ready to discuss strengths and weaknesses. Again, because these are based on facts, and employees, just human nature, tend to take things personally. So we want to make sure that you're prepared with facts in regards to where they did a great job and what you were looking at, and if they fell below expectations, where they fell below and how. Preparing for the performance appraisal system, so we're still going through there. We rate the employee's performance over the entire review period. We want to make sure that we have a way to track and keep continuous documentation that will help make sure that we have something that reflects the whole performance period. And I'll give you examples. There's sometimes when employees fall short below that, and we have to, give disciplinary, maybe written, maybe even have to put them in a performance improvement plan. There's many times when employees turn it around. Sometimes they just need that to kind of wake them up to get on top of it, and then they turn it around. And so we want to make sure, or vice versa, where they start off the year strong and then they end bad. People are human. There's things that happen that may cause them to have ups and downs drastically like that throughout the year. And if that's a small portion of the year, we don't want to ding them and give them a bad review for 2 months of work when they did the 10 months of work, they were fine. But a lot of times, if that bad period was the last 2 months before the review, guess what we as managers tend to focus on? So we want to make sure that we don't have that behavior, that we are clearly looking at the whole time what they did well as they didn't do well, and making sure that we are focused on the whole picture and not just a snapshot of it. Now, it's different if we've had issues with them throughout the year, then that's not going to be the best review for them, and we will address that accordingly in regards to how they're reviewed. Make sure that you obtain any necessary approvals in advance, or making sure your employees do. That way you have eyes on everything, and making sure that there's nothing that's being presented to your employees that you're going to be blindsided later with, and maybe an unemployment hearing or a worst case scenario type of lawsuit. Because even though these aren't mandatory, once they are done, they do become part of a legal file and legal documents. So we want to make sure that whatever could be subpoenaed and put before a judge, or whoever in court or in a mediation meeting, that it's not going to embarrass us as a company and cause us to have to potentially pay out more than what we want to, or anything if we had to. Okay. So some common errors that we want to avoid are the following. So we want to make sure that we have a formal policy or procedures. When we don't, then we run into issues. We want to make sure that we have a written policy that details the appraisal process and that it's consistent. And this helps us with any issues or future claims of negligence or wrongful discharge or anything. We also want to make sure that we have clear, yes.
We lost your audio for like half a second. So I think you were saying something about we want to make sure that it's consistent, and right around there is where we lost you.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we want to make sure that we have a formal policy. We run into issues when there's no formal policy or procedures or written policies. When we just kind of do them off the cuff, employees will call us out on that. If something's not consistent, if it's all over the place and we just kind of do things at whim, there's no clear structure to it, it can and will be used against us, whether it's used in future claims of negligence or wrongful discharge, or if we demote someone that's a problem. If we take any negative actions in regards to it and we don't have the proper documentation or processes, it will come back to haunt us. So we want to make sure that we are consistent, and the way to have consistency is to have policies and procedures. We want to make sure that we don't lack clear standards of policies and how to do the appraisals, and that's solved by training. When we have different managers that are doing, maybe we have our policies and procedures, but we haven't gone through the rater. So for example, when I have a competency-based system, so let's say team building is one of our attributes of that, one of the competencies. It's best to have team building and an explanation of what team building is. I've even seen from 1 to 5, we say what's considered unacceptable in regards to that area and what's considered as exceeding. So then it's clear, depending on whatever supervisor is giving it, how we're going to grade that standard. And then that way you have consistency. The next one, inadequate rating systems. That's when the performance appraisal form is too complex and it leads to misinterpretation, misuse of it. You know, if it's too complex or too long, then people kind of gloss over it, they'll rush through it, and then it doesn't work out. It's not going to be precise. It's going to be hard to distinguish between performance levels because at that point, employees are just and managers are just wanting to get it done. At my last company that I worked at, I came in as their HR director, and one of the biggest complaints company-wide was our performance management system. And what the company had done is someone found some fancy system somewhere full of competencies and all these great things, but they didn't consider the types of employees that would be filling it out. So in this company, we had employees that were skilled trade. You know, their training was in mostly construction based and systems and selling fire alarm systems and stuff like that. So for them to, and we also had some employees that weren't as strong in English as well. So to have them go through and rate themselves in these 11 and 12 pages, and I'm not exaggerating, of a performance appraisal, and to have to go through it and the time it took. And again, they're hourly, and a lot of them were paid based off the jobs that they completed. The time it took them to go through it and fill it out, it lost even the meaning as to why that we were even doing it in the first place. And it just became a point of contention between management and upper level management to get it done, get it out there. No one understood why we were doing it. It was just a very bad experience for the company, and it was hard for them to come back from. So I had to do a lot of finessing to to kind of undo that. So we definitely want to make sure that no one falls into that that error. Some other common errors are inappropriate time span of performance appraisals. We want to make sure that we have an appropriate amount of time that we're reviewing. Appraisals which incorporate incidents that occurred before the last appraisal, that's unfair to include. So I know sometimes we'll have appraisals that will have issues, and we look at the year, and let's say we give the appraisals in December, we may have issues that cut off right at that December point the year before, but we want to leave that in that time frame. We're only looking at that current, let's say for example 2019. If we go back to November of 2018, we're reaching back too far. So we want to make sure in its appropriate amount of time. We want to show forgiveness. We can't always beat up our employees for something that they've done in the past. And sometimes it's pretty major, and managers and stuff, we're still a little bitter from it, but we have to move on and take a look at that snapshot, that current year or quarter that we're actually going to take a look at, okay? We also want to make sure that we don't overemphasize uncharacteristic performance. An appraisal should focus on typical performance rather than uncharacteristic or unusual behavior. For example, I had the situation where I was explaining where you may have someone that's great all year, but the last couple months before that review has been coming in late, they've been dropping the ball, missing deadlines. What we don't want to do is use that performance review time to harp on the last 2 months. We never know. They may have come down with the illness, going through divorce. I mean, there's all types of things that happen outside of work that will affect them. So we want to encourage them and let them know, hey, what's going on? All year you were killing it. You did a great job at this. And this last couple months, what's going on? This is not what we expect from you. And, and have those discussions. And, or sometimes they're just ready to move on. They're not feeling their job anymore. That happens often as well. But we want to have that conversation. We don't want to just beat them up for the last couple of months, because then they're going to say, hey, well, wait a minute, I performed for you all year. Why are you harping on these 2 months? I'm going through a rough patch, and, I'll get back together. I'll get it together and get back on it. So we want to make sure we do that. We also don't want to forget if they have not been the best employee all year and they clean it up a couple months before because they know review time is coming. We want to make sure that we remind them that, hey, we've had to talk with you several times throughout the year about your performance and, your attendance and missing deadlines or what have you. And we appreciate that you've, heard the feedback and, have corrected it. And we hope that as we go into this next year or next several months or what have you, that you're going to continue this. So we want to make sure of that as well. Another big error that I always see is waiting for the appraisal meeting to discuss performance. Employees should, to discuss performance. Employees should receive feedback from their supervisor ongoing, whether it be positive or negative. You know, if they're not, you know, doing what they're supposed to be doing early in that review period, waiting months and months before we give it to them, it just, they're going to get worse. And they're going to, of course, say, well, why didn't you tell me, you know, 3 months ago when this came up? And then you don't want to get to the point where they're feeling surprised and, you know, wow, this is out of the blue. You never said anything. So even though it's not always, you know, comfortable to give negative feedback or constructive, we want to make sure that there's no surprises. We owe it to them and we owe it to us as a business. Yes, I see a question coming through.
Sorry, I was muted.
Oh,
The
that's okay.
question is, do you use a specific software for performance appraisal system? And if so, do you have some examples? Wondering how you organize, log all of the information.
Absolutely. Performance reviews can be as fancy or as simple as you want to keep them. There's so many different type of review systems out there that are already easy to kind of grab and use, whether you just print something off and use a PDF form. There's also different HRIS systems out there. HRIS stands for Human Resources Information System software that are good employee management systems, and a lot of those will include a type of performance management in them. So it just depends on how fancy you want to get with it, in other words. So there's some really good softwares out there. A lot of the payroll companies have software. There's some standalone software. There's, you know, every other provider pretty much out there has it. If you Google performance management software, you're going to get a slew of stuff. One of our last seminars that we're going to go through, I'm going to go through some, it's called HR systems. So we'll talk through that in regards to good systems for payroll when you're shopping for payroll providers, benefit providers, as well as HRIS systems. And we're going to talk through some of that in detail. But I would say initially, if you're just starting off to them, I would suggest start a little bit more simple as you're getting comfortable with them and what works and what's not going to work for your company before making it too formal and too fancy, so to speak, because you don't want it to be so much where it gets away from you and ends up being more work, and you're so involved in getting the system to work and employees learning how to log in and use it, and managers, that again, the whole reason for doing reviews gets missed. Mm-hmm. Yes, and is there another question? Great question.
I know there was just a thank you for.
Oh, you're welcome. Absolutely, you're welcome. All right. Some other common errors: inadequate observation. Inadequate observation occurs when the individual conducting the review does not work closely with the employee and does not know the employee's key job duties. Appraisers must observe the employee's performance and work closely with the employee. And I'll tell you, you know, they have a saying, inspect what you expect, right? You know, we want to make sure that we're able to give feedback, and I'll tell you, it'll go in one ear and out the other for an employee that's getting reviewed by a manager who they've never worked with. And sometimes that happens when you have multi-levels and you have, let's say, your immediate supervisor or manager that deals with the day-to-day, but the company has decided, well, no, only the directors give, you know, the reviews because they're at director level, they know what to say, what not to say. But then it seems very insincere coming from that director when they don't have that interaction with the employee. It's going to be them just reading over some stuff. They don't have that connection with them. So I would always suggest that it be someone who's involved in the ongoing monitoring and review of that employee. The other one is called the halo effect, or the horns pitchfork effect. And that's kind of how it sounds, right? We have the halo effect occurs when appraisers let one strong positive value judgment in one area color their judgment in the area. So let's say you have 1 month where this employee knocks it out the park. They bring in, let's say it's a sales environment, and they bring in that whale of a client that, oh my gosh, takes the company to the next level. And it's just like, no one can stop bragging about it. And oh my gosh, Joe did so great. He brought in the so-and-so account, remember that. But let's say that's the only thing that he did all year. You know, and the rest of the year, he had a lot of call outs. He was unreliable. He didn't follow up on other leads like he should have. So, you know, it's really easy to just focus on the big, great thing. But we're looking at the total performance. We want to give him kudos for snapping that account. But we also need to let them know that, you know, that's great, but we need to see this all the time, you know, and following up with your work. The other side of it, for the horns or pitchfork effect, if someone has something negative, we do not want to beat them over the head with it and only kind of look at that. And, you know, that tends to happen, right? We're human, and we, you know, the major things, whether it's good or bad, tend to stand out with us. So we want to make sure that we're taking a look at our rater bias and making sure that we are equally spreading things across. Now, it may be that the person had a horrible year, and then that's, you know, then their review is not going to go well, right? It's not going to be a not so positive review. Or they're our top performer and they knock it out the park. Everything we give them to do, they do it and then some. And so it's just going to be a great review. You know, and we're human. We don't like to hurt anyone's feelings. We want to make sure that we're encouraging people. And, you know, there's always a tendency for us to want to lean towards the favorable ratings, you know, that people want to like us. We don't want our employees mad at us, but we're not doing them a favor, or the company or ourselves a favor, if it's not, you know, an accurate picture of really what their performance was like. And similarly, we also talked about the recency error, excuse me. You know, we're human again. There's a lot that happens. Things are happening very quickly right now, and as always that we find. So we may fail to remember events and behaviors that occurred during the entire review period. I mean, if we say, what did you eat for lunch, March 2nd, I bet most of us cannot answer that question. So if we can't answer that, how are we going to say how our employees performed, you know, in March, you know, when it comes to be later in the year? So that's why it's so important that we document throughout the year. And again, it could just be informally as we're giving reminders and feedback. We have our manager's notes that we're documenting things, whether it be just on a tablet or written pad or kept in our computer or something, to kind of remember how their performance was. The best ways to do that, again, is to have those sit-down one-on-one meetings and kind of document discussions that you have in those meetings. That way, come the end of the year, we have a good picture of how that person did throughout the year. And then we have leniency or strictness appraisers. So, you know, we have the people that are reluctant to hurt someone's feelings. So we just tell them they're exceeding, right? I mean, everyone's exceeding. We put them average. That makes them happy. We think that, oh, that's going to encourage them to, you know, to want to go out there and do better, even if they truly didn't earn that. And then, of course, when we tie it to bonuses or raises, and I've had managers do this, they come back and they'll say, oh, I didn't realize giving them, you know, that 2.5, that they weren't going to qualify for a bonus this year. Okay, well, let me take a look at it and see where I can give them more points. My comment to them is no, they earned what they've earned. If this is truly what they've earned, and they didn't earn a bonus is supposed to give you credit for the good work you've done. If you didn't earn that, then you don't get a bonus. It's not just, you don't arbitrarily just get it. So they've got to earn it. So even though, you know, a lot of times our reviews are connected to financial rewards, you know, their review is their review. You know, they've either earned it or they didn't earn it. The same thing is when people say, oh, I feel so bad I had to fire so-and-so. No, you didn't fire them. They fired themselves. They violated the policy or they did whatever to get fired. Same thing with reviews. They earned their review. And then central tendency error. And that's when, you know, they don't want to, you know, they don't want to have unfairness in between the team. They're concerned about how people are going to be perceived. So they say, hey, everyone did a great job. Everyone is average. Or they tend to lean towards average. You know, we don't want to do that either. We want to, again, be accurate. If you have some stars on the team, give credit where credit is due. If you have some folks on the team that are not quite shiny like stars, we want to also do that as well. A lot of times, again, when we have reviews that are, let's say 1 to 5, 1 being unacceptable performance, 5 being, you know, awesome, outstanding employee, again, people tend to just do 3, meets expectations. Well, if they truly have exceeded in the area, give them credit for that. You know, so give them credit. Some people say, well, there's always room for them to work in. But okay, that may be. But if this area, if they knocked it out the park, what more can they have done to get to the next area? You know, that's one of the things I always say for, you know, for those. If there's something else that they could have done to get an exceeds or outstanding, then maybe it is average. But if you can't tell me, like, if I say, wow, so-and-so has great customer service. I mean, they're always getting, positive reviews from the guests. They go above and beyond, but you put them as average. What else can they do to get to the next level? And the manager will think and say, well, no, they pretty much do it. Okay, we'll bump up their score. Or if it falls below. And it's like, well, wait a minute, they're average, but we've gotten complaints, we've got this. What else would they have to do to show you that they're not meeting expectations? So we want to make sure of that as well. Another contrast to errors are these happen when appraiser's rating of an employee is influenced by exceptional performance of others. It's not, sometimes it happens where you have a group where you have one or two people knock it out the park and the other folks are just kind of lagging behind. It doesn't mean necessarily that they're doing less than what they should. It just means that they have different incentives. Their motive is to come in, do their job, do good at what they're supposed to do, and that's it. They're not interested in setting and breaking records and everything else. And we don't want to use that to, kind of block out shade our areas of how we think of the other employees. We want to say, okay, well, did they do their job? Yeah, great. But then we have ways that we can award the top performers. Again, avoiding negative feedback. Appraisers may find it uncomfortable to give negative feedback. Again, we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, right? It's easier to tell someone you're doing great than to tell someone you're not doing great. But again, if there's a time when it comes where you have to discipline someone or, have to defend wrongful termination or discrimination, it's really hard to do that when their review says that they were an excellent employee, they were a team player, and you term them. That's going to be used against you in court. So we want to make sure we don't set ourselves up for failure for that. Length of service bias. We just assume that folks who've been around, oh, that person's been here 10 years, or because a lot of you guys, the companies are new, oh, they opened up with me, they know what they're doing, they've been here for me thick and thin, they helped me, get to this level. And so we want to, in a sense, thank them for their loyalty. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're a top performer. So we want to make sure that we don't just have that length of service bias and or that loyalty kind of bias also, right? And just automatically rate them high. Personal competitiveness bias. Appraisers who feel they are in competition with their subordinates may feel their employees are not entitled to higher performance ratings than the appraiser received. I've seen this when someone gets promoted from that position, where they were, the sales admin and they got to be the sales manager or, whatever it may be. And then they're having to rate their peers and people they used to work with. And it's like, well, when I was in that role, I did this, that, and the other. So I'm not going to rate them just because they did that. That's what I did. So they need to beat me, whatever. That's we want to just focus on the job description and how that person is performing. We don't want to base it on that manager or anyone else other than what the position requires and who's currently filling it. So it's important that we review all employees equally based on job-related criteria and standards that have been established in advance. It's important for appraisers to evaluate employees and documented job-related factors and keep personal judgments out of the equations. Okay, so we get to the final meeting preparation. So we know we've scheduled our meeting now 10 days in advance. It's a couple days before. We know we've got to meet with Sam and Susie and give them their review. So we want to prepare. We want to be prepared. So let's, we're going to take a look at what we've reviewed. We've got the appropriate sign-offs. Okay, let's draft goals for the employee to pursue. So we want to try to end, whether it's a positive or negative review meeting, what's the next steps? When they leave that review meeting with you, what are their goals going to be for the next quarter or the next review period, next time you sit with them? So we're going to make sure that we're clear with those goals. We want to make sure that the goals are doable and that they're not too many goals, about 2 to 3 to leave there from that's going to make an impact in their job or their department. Complete the performance appraisal form and develop a format for the meeting. Make sure the review is accurate. Complete all information and make sure it's based off of job-related factors. Review the evaluation of the employee with their supervisor or manager just to make sure everyone's on the same page. So whether it's positive or negative, and for complaints, I'll tell you, it's never a fun thing when an employee comes to complain about their review and they say, well, this is what I reviewed, and they give me a copy and the manager didn't run it by anyone else, and the manager was wrong in how they did things. It makes for a not so good conversations there. So it's good to have all that done ahead of time. That way we can stand by the reviews that are given. Conducting the performance appraisal meeting. Begin the meeting and start the discussion, of course, in a friendly yet business-like manner. Set the agenda and solicit the employees' input. So, it's going to be casual, but it's going to be formatted, oh, thank you, Josie, for sitting down with me. I've had a chance to document your performance, and we're going to sit down and go through that today. I always suggest having a copy to hand them, because we're going to have them sign a copy as well for their personal files, or if it's electronic, there's a way to send it to them for them to acknowledge and sign it electronically. But we want them to have a copy, and they can follow along, because we're not going to sit and review everything with it. We're not going to say customer service. Well, I think in customer service, they can read and go along, and then we're going to talk them through how we came up with their rating for that. In customer service, I rated you a 4, and this is why. You consistently do a great job, and blah, blah, blah. We've gotten whatever customer compliments. So we're kind of talking through how we came to each of those raters that we came up with. As you go along, solicit the employee's input, whether it be, so do you have any questions about the feedback I gave on that one? Or how do you think you did on this area? This should be a two-way conversation. We don't want it just to be me reading something, they nod and nod, yep, then they leave the room and they're not happy, or they complain, or, or they don't buy into the goals that were given to them at the end of the meeting. When you give the feedback, review and assess the employee's performance as you have observed and documented throughout the review period. Discuss behaviors and use objective and specific examples to justify ratings. Avoid personal judgments. One of the good reasons for having someone else look at it before you give it is because they can kind of call you out if there's any things that sounds personal in there. Review the employee self-assessment if one was done, and identify and discuss those areas where the employee and supervisor assessments differ. So there's some reviews where the employee gets it ahead of time and the supervisor has it, and the employee has it for, let's say, 2 weeks, and then that 2 weeks they go through and they fill out how they did on their part. And then they give it to the manager, and the manager reviews, and then they fill out how they did. And then sometimes in the review meeting you compare. There's some situations where that works, and there's sometimes when it doesn't. I'm not as often a fan of that because because it can end up being combative sometimes, especially if the two are totally far apart. A hybrid of that could be, hey, Sam, next month we know your review is coming up. Why don't you take a look at the review and feel free to submit to me any projects you've worked on, any kind of things you want me to consider, so that I don't miss anything. So that could be a way of getting their input as well. Then it kind of puts it on them too, so that what you've been collecting throughout the year is somewhat similar to what they think that they've done well on. You want to make sure that you set goals, set new objectives, and develop action plans for the next evaluation period. Discuss the employee's career interests. Where do they see themselves? They may say, I really see myself, I want to become a manager, or I want to get more experience in this area and maybe work in this department. So when we do that, then we can help set them, up for a realistic plan to meet the goals. And it may be job specific, and it may be outside of their job. So maybe having a hybrid of both, because what we want to do is, encourage our employees to motivate them, let them know that we support them, whether it be working for us or another manager in the company. And even externally, I've had companies, that's one of the ways I started into human resources. I was 20 years old working in a customer service at a retail chain. And I was getting ready, preparing for graduation. And I told my office manager at that time, I said, yeah, I want to go into HR. I was applying to grad schools. And she said, oh, you want to go into HR? I said, yeah, if there's anything you happen to get experience. So she started me being able to help with interviews and reviewing resumes and doing reference checkings and things. So, hello? Okay. and doing reference checks and things like that. So that kind of started giving my first taste. So it had nothing to do with the current job I was doing, but it helped me, you know, be more excited about coming to work because it was like, great, I can do my duties and then some. And it just helped me also, you know, appreciate her, you know, investing that time in me too. So we know that employees maybe our, you know, our job may not be the last stop for them. So why not help develop them and motivate them towards the next step? Okay. When we conclude the meeting, summarize and review and set a date for follow-up progress meeting. Try to end on a positive note, even if the feedback wasn't positive. And always set a follow-up date if the information you gave them is negative. If it was, you know, most of the stuff needs improvement and you need to get it together, then we want to have some deliverables. We want to have 30-day follow-up, maybe 60-day follow-up, because that's going to be also our ongoing documentation as well. And so if we have to take it to further disciplinary or termination, now we have our appraisal to support it. We have the follow-up meetings to add to that, and then we can take action from that. Okay, did we have a comment in the, let's see, in the chat?
Hold on a second. Sinette, your mic is on, and I can't turn it off.
Okay, I think we got that. Okay. All right, and then end on, even if it's negative, also end on a positive note. You know, even if we inside kind of aren't feeling this positive, you know, let's make sure that we, you know, portray that with our employee and say, you know what, I know you've had a rough year. You know, we've had a few of these meetings and these sit downs, but we wouldn't have hired you or you wouldn't be in this position if we didn't think you could do it. So here's the goal. So moving forward, let's make sure, you know, you come in on time. Let's make sure you communicate. Let's say they've missed a lot of deadlines. You know, if the deadlines I'm giving you aren't working, let me know ahead of time before you miss the deadlines. I can't tell you how many times I've had that conversation with people, but try to end it on a positive note. Even though we know where it may end, we're going to at least try to end it that way. Do we have a question?
Yes, we do.
Excellent.
So the question is, how do you reward top performers? Do you have examples from your experience? And also, how do you do this without discouraging other employees?
Absolutely. So there's different ways to do it. You can have merit increases built in, and your top performers, if they fall between a certain rating, let's say you say, well, the highest I can afford to give is 5% increases, right? And so your high performers would get the maximum increase, and then the not as high performers will either get no increase or they may get 2 or 3% increase. Or you may say, well, that's also included in the bonus amounts of who gets bonuses. So there's different ways to do that. There's also different things you can do throughout the year that's not necessarily hitting their check, but it could be other things. So one of my clients is an Amazon delivery provider. And they have Amazon measures everything. They get it down to the T. And, you know, when she rates them and she can review from week to week and month to month their routes, how fast they do their routes, how accurate their routes are, how much of their deliveries that they're able to complete. And so just even going along from week to week, she'll have goals and saying, you know, who's completed the most routes and without errors. And she'll do gift cards. So even as simple as a gift card. I've had employees in the past for managers and retention, you know, kind of things. And there's, you know, you can even do certificates and employee of the month awards and things like that. So there's a lot of different ways you can be creative where it's tied to financial incentives and even non-financial incentives. Another thing I used to do when I worked for a large fast food chain and motivating my restaurant managers. And we had a system where you could go in and get discounted, you know, pins that you can, you know, wear, they can wear with their uniform, hats and different kind of, you know, company gear, so to speak. And my managers had the same access to the system, but I will tell you, I would go on and I would buy a bunch of fun stuff from there and really discounted. And I would tie those to the, you know, to the rewards. And I tell you what, a $2 pin or during the holidays, giving Christmas tree ornaments, that brighten their day. Something so simple. So just that recognition. So it can be really simple to give recognition, and you can do fancier things. But some companies, they do sales trips and everything else, right, to be fancy. But you know, you can make it as simple as you know, as you want, or as complicated as you kind of want. But those are some different options. Okay. Okay. So post-appraisal task, allow employees to add comments to the appraisal form, especially if they disagree, if they have some feedback. Obtain the employee's signature and date on the form. That way they acknowledge. And I always tell employees, I say, this is acknowledging that the review happened. If they, if they don't agree or what have you, it's not saying I agree with everything. It's just saying that we met and went through this. And sometimes you have, employees that don't want to acknowledge it and, things like that. And, that's their right. We can't force them to file anything. But, I do let them know that it still stands, and I document that, employee refused to sign. Retain the performance appraisal in the file and provide a copy to the employee so that they can periodically review their goals. So I don't mind giving them a copy. There's some states where if you sign something, anything you signed, and you're bound and you can ask for a copy of that. So sometimes I'll use that to try to get them to sign it and say, well, if you want a copy of it, then you need to sign it. But, whether they do or don't too, it's good for them to have it. That way they can't say that they didn't know what they were supposed to do moving forward or what their goals were, anything like that. All right, so phrases to avoid. And this some of these also cross over into everyday life as well, right? So when we say you always is rarely a true statement. We may do it every other day or 90% of the time, but it's very rare that someone will always be late, or they will always have a negative attitude, or they will always do this or that. So we want to be careful with making those generalizations, and we want to make sure that we describe specific behaviors using dates whenever possible. So we may say, this is a pattern, and this is a pattern because, as you can see, when I look at the frequency of how often you miss deadlines, that we can go through it, or how often you're late, we can look at time clock records. So we may say you frequently or repeatedly or something like that, but saying you always is a very big statement. On the other side of that, saying you never. Again, the golden rule, right? Never say never, because saying you never, that means there's always that one time when they did. You never meet assignments on time. Oh, I don't? Well, what about blah, 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 blah? And then that discredits your whole kind of feedback to them. They shut off listening from there. So we want to make sure we don't use general, statements like that, because then, they're going to be defensive. They're going to be argumentative. Again, saying things like you frequently, or it's quite often, or more times than not. There's other ways to kind of say similar to things, but we want to make sure also we have those examples. Saying, I think so-and-so is a good person. Well, as much as we want people to be a good person, that's not why they're being hired. Unless you're hiring a pastor or something like that, it does not matter in the workplace whether we think someone's good or not. All we need to focus on is, are they doing their job? Okay, so you're not interviewing the person, you're reviewing the job. So we want to focus on job-related factors such as performance. We hope people are good people and a pleasure to work with and things like that. But, I've had people that aren't the most pleasurable to work with, but they get their job done, and we just leave them alone and let them do it. So we may have that as well. I feel that employee name is not perceived as a leader. Okay, again, we want to be careful with I think and I feel, and we want to go off of examples, okay, of where the employee lacked leadership skills. For example, not being prepared for a meeting. If I say, you're not being a leader, I need you to be more of a leader, and this is what needs to be a leader. When the company gives you things to do, you make sure that you can lead your team and setting examples, goals for them, coming up with a process for them to how to do this. So give them examples, because in fairness, two people may not know what it means to be a leader, or what it means to do what they're missing. So we want to make sure that they have clear understanding of what you're looking for and what they need to do. Employee name seems to struggle with. Again, seems to struggle. Well, let's take it a step further. What is giving you the impression that they're struggling? So that could be an opinion. So what are we using to base our opinion on? And typically what we're using to base our opinion on is what the documents and facts that we need to support that opinion, or how we got to that. So does the employee have the knowledge or skills to complete the task? Does the employee repeatedly make mistakes? I have employees that constantly, they ask me questions to death, and if they're always asking me questions, I'm like, wow, they're maybe really struggling with this, or they're asking the same questions. So that could be an indicator. So if I'm telling someone, wow, you really seems to struggle with this process, you know, we've gone through it many times and I've wrote it down for you, and you know, you ask me questions and that's great, but you're asking me the same questions. So that's how I'm getting this impression. So we want to, of course, support that with facts. You do not respect your coworkers. Well, again, that's a lengthy thing. How is that? You know, well, someone, you know, they're going to always have feedback, you know, because even kind of the worst person in the office usually has one friend. So, well, that doesn't make sense, because so-and-so feels I respect them and we go to lunch, they don't mind me and what have you. So don't focus on the person, focus on the conduct. What is it that they're doing or saying that's being disrespectful? And let's have examples. So let's have the facts. I've had situations where employees eat other people's food in the refrigerator, you know. You know, it can be as simple as that. Well, it's like, well, your coworkers, they don't like it when you go in and you know, you don't bring things or don't consistently, but you're constantly using their creamer or, you know, eating food that they bring in, and that's not respectful to them, you know. So support that with examples. So-and-so, you know, employee name makes an effort. Well, that's great, but how do you measure effort? How can you measure the effort I'm giving towards someone else? You know, there's some of us that are really good with procrastinating and whipping out something at the last minute. And if you say, wow, they really put effort into this, you don't know what they put into that. You can't measure that. You didn't see them up the night before finishing, you know, whatever last pieces on that project versus someone else who took a month to complete something and, you know, to make sure it was nice. So, you know, we measure results. We can only measure outcome. You know, so you want to keep your comments specific to the performance expectations that were established. Oh my goodness. And then the next one, I've heard this one before given, and, you know, they just seem like they don't care. You seem like you don't care. You can't assume that you know if someone cares or not. You know, some people are hard to read. They have different ways also of showing how they care. You know, what has the employee said or done that shows that they care? You know, if they're always coming in, they're talking about, oh, I can't wait to get out of here. I've been interviewing everywhere. Oh, I'll be so happy when I'm out of this job now. And that's examples. Real life examples I'm stating there. You know, those are examples. So focus on, again, specific behaviors that are unacceptable. So those are some different things we want to do to make sure. Okay. So now we've gone through how to come up with our review systems, how to give reviews, how to give feedback, things we want to avoid. These are some of the other things we want to keep in the back of our mind. Again, you know, doing performance reviews aren't anything that are mandatory that we have to do, but if we decide to do them, because they become part of someone's file and employment documentation and kind of legal forms, we have to keep these things in the back of our mind to protect ourselves and the company. So some potential litigation concerns. Accurate job-related performance documentation can be an employee's best justification for employment decision and a defensible record of claims. But it could also be our worst nightmare when it's done wrong. So, but when it's done right, it helps us to avoid discrimination. You know, for example, we have the same forms and processes or similar for similar groups for everyone. Everyone is rated the same fashion. So for someone to say, well, that's not fair, you're treating me differently. Well, that's not so when we have the documentation to prove it. We want to make sure that we avoid disparate treatment, whether it's intentional or differential or what have you. And this is when a treatment of groups or individuals, and they can be employees or applicants, based on a protected class. So for example, race, color, religion, where it affects a certain group, something that we've done only affects people that are, let's say, 40 or over, or that are of a certain gender or something like that. So we want to make sure that it doesn't affect that group, or have a disparate or adverse impact on employment policy or practice which appears to be neutral but excludes a disproportionate number of members of that protected class. So we want to make sure that we take a look at that as well. Those are all the things that we're avoiding by having consistent systems and processes across the company. It also avoids defamation of statement. And I kind of go back to the things that, you know, we want to avoid saying, well, I feel this and I think this. You know, when you go off of feelings and what you think, you can easily get into defamation because it's false if you don't have anything to back it up, especially if it damages a person's reputation by inference or malice and results in injury. If I say, I don't know, I don't think you got it, I just don't think you're a leader. Well, what I think and how I'm rating you based on that, now that's going to prevent that person from getting promotional opportunities and going into management and leadership positions, and therefore has damages because that affects their pay. So we want to be careful. And again, another reason to make sure that we have documentation of things and that's based off facts and not our opinion. Some other things are wrongful discharge. You know, in most states, employment relationships that are not controlled by a collective bargaining agreement or another contract is considered at will. And even though we have that at will stance, which means at any time for any reason, with or without notice or cause, we can end that employment relationship or the employee can leave our employment, it's harder on the employer because we have more to prove. Okay, so we want to make sure that we also avoid that. So when we use the employment at will doctrine to make employment related decisions and say, you know what, this just isn't working now. We just don't think this is the place for you. So we're going to, you know, thank you for your time here. And, you know, we're going to wish you the best of luck and term them. Then, you know, it could be a bunch of issues that come up. It can be, you know, violation of discrimination laws. It could be a breach of written or implied contract. Public policy, want to be careful of if we've let someone go because of they were out serving jury duty, which that one doesn't happen as much, but workers' comp I often see this happen when employees complain a lot and they report out, they file workers' comp claims. Sometimes people will use performance reviews and things as a way to get back at the employee, and we want to be careful of that. Okay, because we definitely don't want to find us in the issue of this, where before I filed my workers' comp claim, I was fine and had good reviews. And then when I came back from workers' comp and had surgery and I maybe even sued the company while I was out, and people can sue and still come right back to work or still be working for you and doing it. And now this is a way for the company to make me, you know, to get me back. That would not be a good strategy to take. And you also want to make sure you have representation of good faith and fair dealing. And that's just making sure that we have rhyme to reason, so to speak, when we're dealing with employees, and that we're just not handling employees arbitrarily and how we feel that day and what we want to do. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, this is my company, and if I don't want them working here, they're not going to work here. Or if I say they need to do this, they should. That's fine. But, you know, it may cost you. So I want to be careful of that. And then also, you know, some of these concepts are a little bit different by state. A lot of these are connected to federal laws as well. But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, you can help reduce exposure to legal actions by maintaining accurate records and basing performance appraisals on specific objective and job-related behaviors. All right. Well, thank you for listening and for your time this evening. And I will open it up to questions.
So while we are waiting for them to type, I just want to remind everybody that our next session on this topic is on June 25th at 6 p.m.
Yes.
And what is the topic for the next one? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Oh, the next one's juicy, discipline and terminations. So this one's the nice way of giving performance feedback, and then the next one's the not so nice one. That's always the meaty one with the questions, because, you know, for some reason we always want to know how to hire people, and how do we get them out when we don't want them without being sued. So that's usually the juicy one of that one there. And, you know, and it's always hard to figure out how to write someone up and things like that, and how to give them feedback and when to give verbal warnings versus a written. So we'll talk through a lot of that in our next one. We'll deal with all of that.
Okay, so we have two questions. One, out of the examples you just mentioned, what are the most common legal issues you've encountered concerning this topic of managing performance? Do you have an example, and how are they remedied?
The biggest issues that I come across are, I think the top three would be untrained managers, when they're kind of thrown a review or a process even that they're supposed to do, and they haven't been trained in how to do it. Then you leave it up to their own vices, and then that's when you get all of the things that we said do not put in there in the review. So I've even had managers include in reviews, you know, you weren't here most of the year because of your workers' comp claim, and you need to be here more and stuff like that, that they've included that. And, you know, if someone were to say, well, just, you know, that's oh my gosh, discrimination based off of that, or retaliation, there we go, retaliation based off my workers' comp claim, it's right there documented. So the best way to remedy that is not only with training, but to also review the feedback that the managers put in the review before it's presented to the employee. And that way, if there's anything that needs to be caught or corrected or expanded on, then it's remedied in that. The other thing I have found is documentation to support the reviews, and examples and things. So where they want to give employees, negative feedback, but there's nothing to back it up. And it's like, well, I remember that one project, or I remember this, or I don't recall. Then if you don't remember, it's not fair to give that feedback to the employee.
Mm-hmm.
Those are kind of the top two.
Okay.
Great,
So
great
the
question.
untrained manager is one, and then the second one is the lack of feedback.
Yes.
The lack of
And
documentation.
right, documentation to support the feedback. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the next question is, are the PowerPoints going to be available for download? Have we done
These are
that?
recorded? I'm sorry.
Yeah, they are recorded, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we have, so all of our sessions are recorded. So the first couple of sessions, I sent a link out, and I'm trying to modify what I typed at the same time as I'm talking. That's not very well. I sent the link out. I can send it again because I have one Dropbox folder that I put everything in. But then what we have done since the first two, because we have people asking about, going back and re-reviewing them, they're going to be available to actually, like you can go log back into Zoom and like watch the recording, or for playback. So it'll be like for online playback. That way, and that's really, for you guys that are here, that's not an issue. But if you miss one, we will be able to see who missed one, because I know some people want to make sure that they get all of them in so that they could get the certificate that we're giving at the end that shows that you attended them all. So we put that mechanism in place for those. Well, we're going to come, Desiree and I have been texting about a mechanism for the first two, since we didn't have that mechanism in place at that time. So what we'll probably do is put together some simple quiz or test that proves that you watched the first two. But we'll figure that out as we get closer to the last ones. So that answers that. So yes, so not that the PowerPoints are available for download, but the entire presentation, including everything she said, is actually available for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next question is, what are some of the more successful performance incentives being used in the marketplace today? And if you have specific info relative to the cannabis industry, please share.
I don't have anything because it's still a newer industry here, as well as many places, right? I don't have any specifics, but there's several reviews that work across industries that I've seen. One of the things that larger companies are getting to is giving, and even some smaller, are giving to ways to give you more regular feedback. So they're trying to get away from just having the annual review and only giving it that time. So there's all kind of different types of ways to rate it. But right now there's a big push on the frequency of feedback and having those ongoing communications with employees. So that's really kind of big what we're seeing now. Is having maybe mini reviews, like it's a quarterly, and then the quarterlies feed into the annual. So just having more ways to get that consistent feedback more regularly.
Okay. And there's something in the chat. What is this? Oh, there was just thanks. Yes, I did see that.
Okay, you're welcome.
So you were just saying that, because I was multitasking. So you don't have anything on the cannabis industry, but people are kind of just being creative.
Right, so there's not anything specific to the industry, at least that we've seen at this point, since it is a newer industry. But there are many types of review systems that are can be used regardless of the industry, and more focused on the type of employees. So something that's common for for non-exempt, more task-oriented employees, or just more of a simple rating system of kind of like we talked about, you come up with the different areas that you want to rate and like a 1 to 5 system and kind of calculating that. That's pretty common. And then for management, competency-based is becoming more common.
Okay. Okay, so are there any other questions before we close out? And I'll just reiterate some of the things I said at the beginning, just in case some of you might not have been here or might not have heard me. We are going to have our next session on HR. The next one is about firing on June 25th at 6 p.m. We are actually creating right now, and they'll be available very soon to register. So I'll be sending an email out about these for security best practices. That will be on June 29th. And that is a Monday. I think that's at 5:30 p.m. because the person who's doing that presentation is on the East Coast. And then we'll also do a networking session on June 30th, and that is at 6 p.m. So that's an opportunity for you guys to connect with each other, because people have asked about that. You know, like I applied for a transporter license, and I want to connect with infusers, and I want to connect with craft growers to transport their products, and I need to find them. And so, so that's going to be a way for you guys to connect with each other, share best practices. And even if you haven't applied for your license yet, still come to that. And I also say right now that if you are planning to apply for your license in the next round, which would be sometime in 2021, you can still get started on the process now. You have the advantage of a whole lot of time. The training and technical assistance that's provided by DCEO for free, which is what we're doing, runs out at the beginning of next year. So if the deadlines happen to be March like they were this year, unless DCEO or unless the state comes up with more grant money, and I'm not convinced that they will, you might not be able to get anything for free if you don't do something now, or I should say now, but before, you know, the end of January. So I can tell you my contract runs through the end of January. So take advantage of the time that you have and start preparing now if you're planning to apply next year. You feel free to contact me to set up a one-on-one to discuss what your plans are, because the other piece is you won't be able to go to the Small Business Development Center because they can't work with you because they're federally funded and cannabis is illegal at the federal level. So that's one of the reasons why I got this contract. So I just want to put that out there for those of you who have been diligent about, you know, attending and you're planning to apply next year and getting all of your ducks in a row, but you haven't actually started the process. We can start that process now. Because I'm still available to you. So I wanted to put that out there. So not seeing any other questions or anything else in chat, I think I've gone on long enough. So thank you all for coming. I hope it was very educational. I learned something. I always learn something from these. So I will see you all in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely.